In 2003, amidst the burgeoning development of online communities in Japan, one website stood out above the rest, something ominously known as the Agency of Dark Professions. The name itself bore a dual meaning. On the one hand, it was indeed an agency shrouded in secrecy and darkness. But in truth, the second interpretation was more accurate. It was a place offering job vacancies for roles that were best kept in the shadows. For instance, it openly sought individuals willing to participate in crimes like phone fraud. At the time of the site's creation, this particular crime was flourishing in Japan. Typically, it involved victims transferring money to dummy accounts, after which someone needed to withdraw those funds and hand them over to a criminal organization. Such a person was referred to as a collector in the phone fraud scheme. There were instances when people drawn into this thought they had merely found a high-paying side job, only later realizing they had become part of a criminal chain. However, as I mentioned earlier, on the Japanese site Agency of Dark Professions, such activities were offered quite openly. Hey, who wants to be a collector? Gather quickly. And that was not all. Occasionally, there were ads seeking people to extract a body from a crime scene, which was truly chilling. Whether this was fact or fiction remains unknown. Beyond this, one could stumble upon ads seeking men for roles in adult films. I think you now have an idea of what kind of site this was. And note, the forum hosted more than just job listings. There are online communities where people can converse anonymously. However, one shouldn't expect upstanding individuals to congregate there. Participants often exaggerated their exploits. For example, someone might claim they were a yakuza member and had dismembered a body, even several times. To this, another would retort, "That's all you've done? I've removed the innards." Overall, it created an atmosphere where everyone tried to outdo one another by showcasing the most horrific crime they were capable of. Since there was no oversight on these declarations, the level of brutality and boasting only escalated over time. Several years passed like this, and eventually, the inevitable happened. A real crime. This occurred on August 16, 2007. The site had a dedicated section for the Tokai region, and there a message appeared. "I've just been released. Who wants to join me in Tokai? Looking for something to do?" The author of this post was a 40-year-old man named Kawagishi Kenji. His message quickly caught the attention of others. A comment appeared. "Hey, if we kidnap someone and extort money, we could earn some pocket cash." This wasn't just a comment. It was a proposal for a crime made by 32-year-old Hori Yoshihito. By extort money, Hori meant not only kidnapping but also draining the victim's finances, including bank accounts. It was a blueprint for robbery. Enter another user. A 36-year-old man with the handle KT, whose real name was Tsukasa Kanda, chimed in, admitting that he primarily dealt in phone scams. Recently, business had been so bad that Kande had to confess, "Since I'm completely out of money, I'm ready to become a robber too." And so, in the blink of an eye, a trio was formed. When Kawagishi and Hori met Kande offline, they began crafting a plan. Hori was the first to suggest, "I know a place I frequent, a pinball club. There's a client there known for carrying large sums of money. Let's rob him." Everyone agreed. "Great, let's do it." They then discussed another option. "I've heard there's a house over there with a lot of cash. Let's rob that one too." The consensus was unanimous. Yes, the three of us can handle it. However, in the end, all their schemes remained just that, plans on paper, and no crimes were committed. Thankfully, of course. But at that moment, the trio was determined to prove they were capable of crime, and with each failed attempt, their frustration only grew. One day, as they gathered again to discuss their next move, Kande spoke up. "You know, I used to be with the yakuza. I can get drugs and weapons. Maybe we can make money that way?" His plan was terrifying. Obtain drugs, kidnap a woman, get her addicted, and sell her to a brothel. Even the mere thought of it sounds horrific, doesn't it? Yet for these three, blinded by the lure of money, the proposition seemed quite enticing. They continued to meet, refining their plan and preparing to set it into motion. However, acquiring drugs or contacting an establishment for sexual services is a high-risk endeavor. It appeared they lost their nerve. Their conclusion was this: "Let's kidnap a young woman. To get the money, it's better to choose someone between 20 and 30 years old, especially office workers. They tend to have a lot of money." Thus, they set their sights on women in this category. But the problem was far more sinister. Their plan was not just about robbery anymore. It's unclear what crossed their minds during their discussions, but they resolved to abduct the victim, kill her, and hide the body in the mountains, aiming to commit the perfect crime. Their scheme had escalated from mere robbery to murder. The day of the crime arrived. The three men got into Kawagishi's car and began circling the neighborhood. They were on the hunt for a suitable victim to abduct. Kawagishi was at the wheel, while Kanda and Hori sat in the back, donning work gloves. Their plan was as follows. If they spotted a woman on the left side of the car, Kanda would open the door and drag her inside. If on the right, Hori would do the deed. They had prepared numerous rolls of packing tape to silence the screams of their victim once she was inside the vehicle. They roamed around ATMs, lying in wait for someone to withdraw cash, intending to swiftly kidnap that woman. And it was at this moment that their eyes fell upon a 30-year-old woman named Isugai Ri. She was an ordinary office worker. Long ago, she had dreamt of becoming a chef. Recently, she had mustered the courage to quit her job. On the very day the incident occurred, her colleagues had thrown her a farewell party. Returning from it, around 11 p.m., Kawagishi spotted Isugai walking alone on the deserted street. Judging by her semi-formal attire, she likely worked in an office. This seemed like a fortunate find, a woman who probably had money. As soon as they spotted her, Kawagi and his accomplices began to tail her. It took about 5 or 10 minutes before Isugai was walking past the right side of their car, and suddenly, the door swung open. But this wasn't part of any premeditated abduction plan. First, Holly stepped out of the car, pretending he wanted to ask her something, and calmly approached Isugai. As he got closer, he unexpectedly grabbed her, covered her mouth, and tied her up. He quickly dragged her into the back seat. Meanwhile, Kanda, who had been waiting inside the car, held her tightly and pulled her inside. In an instant, Isugai found herself in an unfamiliar vehicle. From there, the three men started demanding, "Hand over all your money, give us the PIN code, or we'll kill you." Imagine the terror Isugai must have felt, with three men who had just kidnapped her now threatening her life. Facing this dire situation, Isugai quickly surrendered everything she had, approximately 600,000 won in cash, and a wallet containing her bank cards. They took it all. Then the criminals began to intimidate her to extract the card passwords. During this, they even attempted to assault her. However, contrary to their expectations, Isugai showed unexpected resilience. Despite their threats, she stubbornly refused to divulge the passwords. The reason for her defiance lay in the fact that Isugai had recently quit her job and dreamed of becoming a chef. To pursue this dream, she had been saving money for a long time, and her cards held a significant sum. This money was the embodiment of her dream, and she was determined not to lose it. The criminals were bewildered by her unwavering resolve. That's when Kawagi decided to change tactics. He pulled out a knife and menacingly held it to Isugai's throat. "If you don't tell us the password in 5 minutes, we'll kill you," he threatened. Despite everything, Isugai remained silent. At that moment, Kanda turned to Hori and said, "Just hit him a couple of times." But even Hori couldn't bring himself to strike and only pretended to attack Isugai, creating the illusion of aggression. The tension in the air was palpable. Realizing the peril he was in, Isugai finally gave in and struggled to utter the password, 2960, 2960. However, dear listeners, this number was, in fact, a fake. They never gave the real number until the very end. Yet the criminals, unaware of the deceit, hurriedly jotted it down. Believing everything had gone according to plan, they moved on to the next phase, Isugai's murder. The process was appallingly brutal. I'll recount everything in detail, but be warned, it will take time. Initially, the accomplices in the back seat began to strangle her. Yet Isugai just breathed heavily, not ceasing to breathe entirely. Then Hori wrapped a rope around her neck, while Kawagishi and another person pulled from both sides. However, it seemed they didn't know how to tie the rope properly, because no matter how hard they pulled, the rope slipped around her neck and failed to do its job. In the end, it didn't work. Realizing things were going awry, Hori retrieved a pre-prepared metal bat. He struck Isugai on the head forcefully. Not just once. Once, twice, 3 times. Wounds opened, and blood splattered across the car's interior. But Hori was so shocked by this that he dropped the bat. Isugai lost consciousness, and it seemed she was dead. Yet suddenly, a moment later, she whispered, "Please save me. I don't want to die." Isugai came to and in one last desperate bid, pleaded for mercy. The criminals had no intention of listening to her. On the contrary, they were surprised she was still alive and decided to press on. The only weapon left at their disposal was duct tape. They began wrapping it around her head, hoping she would suffocate. These three truly knew no mercy. However, as they wound the tape, small gaps remained, allowing Isugai to breathe faintly. Because of this, She didn't perish as the criminals had planned. They then opted to place a plastic bag over her head and wrapped it with tape once more. But this was not the end. To ensure she was truly dead, they took a metal bat and began striking her head. Not just once or twice, but a staggering 30 times. Thus, 3 grueling hours after her abduction, Isegai, in horrific agony, having endured every conceivable torment, passed away. This was murder, but with such prolonged beating and suffocation, it more closely resembled torture. Afterward, as if nothing had happened, the criminals bought a bottle of water from a vending machine to wash off the blood, changed their clothes, and continued with their plan. They loaded the body into a car and drove it dozens of kilometers from the crime scene, into the mountains near the city of Mizunami in Gifu Prefecture, where they abandoned it. Confident that everything was behind them, the criminals reached the nearest ATM, expecting to withdraw cash from the card they had just stolen. But a problem arose. Every time they entered the PIN, the system returned an error. They thought there might be an issue with the ATM, so they tried another machine. However, they encountered the same errors there too, making it impossible to withdraw any money. In desperation, they even pulled out the ID from the stolen wallet, attempting to use the owner's birth date, as people often do. They tried various combinations, but to no avail. It drove them into a rage. In the end, after everything they had done that night, committing murder and disposing of the body, they were left with a mere 600,000 won, far less than they had anticipated. Disappointed, they concluded that it might be worth doing it all over again. They planned to abduct another woman that very night and attempt once again to extort money. After making their plans, the trio dispersed in different directions. Hori and Kanda headed home, while Kawa and Gissen stayed in the car. They tried to fall asleep, but sleep eluded them, and they began to recall the events of the past day. In truth, Kawa and Gissen had not intended for things to escalate to murder. Kawa had previous convictions, and his fingerprints were already in the Japanese police database. This fact weighed heavily on his mind. When it comes to major crimes like murder, becoming a target for the police becomes alarmingly easy. This was exactly what crossed Kawa's mind as he drove his car that day. He suddenly realized, if I continue like this, they'll catch me soon. But then he thought of his accomplices, Hori and Kanda, who always boasted about never having been caught by the police. Without any criminal record, they seemed to act with more confidence and freedom. However, by that point, Kawa-Gissen began to feel uneasy. What if they catch me? The thought tormented him repeatedly. That night, he didn't sleep a wink, and his fear only grew. The next morning, he made the decision to turn himself into the police. He reasoned that if the truth was bound to come out anyway, it would be better to confess first and try to reduce his sentence. Kawa-Gissen went to the station, and within a few hours after Isagai's death, all the details of the case came to light. That very night, the police trusted Kawa's words and lured Hori and Kanda, his accomplices, to arrest them. All 3 were handed over to the prosecutor's office, and this heinous crime, unlike any other, became public knowledge. At that moment, Japan was in shock. The internet wasn't as developed in the early 2000s, and here was a group of people who didn't know each other personally, conspiring online to commit murder. It seemed both incredible and terrifying for that time. Hence, the case was dubbed the Dark Site case. The trial began. Kawa-Gissen, having confessed to his crimes, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Hori and Kande received death sentences at their initial hearing. Kande chose not to appeal the decision, and his execution was carried out in 2015. Hori, on the other hand, continues to claim that his sentence is unjust, filing appeals and seeking reviews. His stance is clear. Please grant me at least life imprisonment. The death penalty is too harsh. Yet during the investigation, other crimes committed by him surfaced, including a murder during a robbery. It's mind-boggling. As a result, he remains on death row in Japan. The internet has undeniably enhanced our lives. It's thanks to the internet that I can share with you stories of global events and mysteries. However, this convenience sometimes provides fertile ground for crime. Although the notorious dark websites have been shut down, one might suspect they've simply migrated to other platforms and social networks. In other words, the dark web might still exist in places unknown to us. Lastly, the victim's mother continues to live with a profound emotional scar, even though over a decade has passed since the tragedy. It's especially painful for her to recall how her daughter resisted the robbers until the end, memories that inevitably bring her to tears. In one interview, the mother expressed hope that such an event would never happen again. Now, nearly 20 years after the crime, can we truly say the world is a safer place? May Isogai Riate rest in peace, unfairly taken from this world. Stay with me, the second story is coming up, and it's just as shocking. Let me know in the comments what you think about the first story. Your thoughts always mean a lot to me. Shotaro Chetsumi was a 16-year-old teenager living in the Kitaku district of Japan. He was the youngest of 4 children, growing up in an environment filled with love and warmth. Unlike many of his peers who struggled through the tumultuous teenage years, Shotaro was an exception. Outgoing and deeply attached to his family, his charming demeanor made him the apple of their eyes. A diligent student with a wide circle of friends, he was a model pupil, admired not only by his peers but also by his teachers. On the evening of October 4, 2010, Shotaro and his family gathered as usual in the living room. They shared dinner, watched their favorite TV show, and chatted about the day's events. After the show ended, Shotaro mentioned he was stepping out briefly. His birthday was just around the corner, and a girl, referred to as A, had asked to meet him. Trusting him and knowing the meeting spot was close by, his parents allowed him to go, but they insisted he return soon. At approximately 10:50 p.m., Shotaro met A near a vending machine close to their home. They chatted casually. "What did you do yesterday? Went to karaoke with a friend? Your birthday's coming up. What do you want as a gift?" But suddenly, A felt the unsettling sensation of someone's eyes fixed on her. Looking around, she noticed a man standing across the street, staring intently at them. It was late at night, and the eerie situation sent a chill down her spine. "Shotaro, that guy's acting weird, don't you think?" she said nervously. Before he could respond, the man abruptly began walking toward them. Sensing danger, Shotaro instinctively stepped in front of A to shield her. The man pulled out a knife, and with a sharp cry of, "Run!" Shotaro lunged at him, trying to fend him off. The attacker struck, driving the blade into Shotaro's neck and stabbing him several more times. Terrified and desperate, A fled to find help, informing some friends about the attack before returning to the scene. At first glance, the area appeared quiet, but as she strained her ears, she caught the faint sound of a groan. Following the sound, she discovered Shotaro lying on the road nearby, bleeding profusely. Her friends, who had rushed to her aid, immediately called the police and an ambulance. Tragically, despite the paramedics' best efforts, Shotaro succumbed to massive blood loss on the way to the hospital. His parents, already worried about his prolonged absence, were informed of the horrifying incident. They rushed to the hospital, only to be met with the devastating news of their son's death. Shotaro's father still recalls the moment he held his son's cold hand, hoping his warmth might somehow bring him back to life. The father simply could not let go of his son's hand. It is almost impossible to imagine the unbearable pain of a family that lost their beloved youngest son in a single night. The police launched an investigation immediately. At first, it seemed that the case would be solved quickly. They had a key witness, A, the girl who had seen the attacker. Although she had never encountered the man before, she managed to remember his appearance in detail. Based on her description, a composite sketch was created. A man approximately 160 to 170 centimeters tall, slightly overweight, with thick eyebrows, narrow and sharp eyes, and wavy hair. Soon, about 100 meters from the crime scene, a knife was discovered in a ditch, believed to be the weapon used in the attack. However, despite meticulous forensic examination, the weapon bore no fingerprints or traces pointing to the perpetrator. The only substantial piece of evidence was DNA found on Shotaro's shirt, belonging to an unidentified third party. Unfortunately, this DNA did not match any records in the criminal database. Moreover, there were no surveillance cameras in the area. Despite having a composite sketch and DNA evidence, the police were unable to trace the perpetrator. Desperate and unwilling to stand idly by, Shotaro's family took matters into their own hands. They began posting on the internet and on blogs that Shotaro loved visiting, pleading for help and asking for any information. But the response was both unexpected and deeply painful. The posts quickly filled with cruel and insulting comments. As it turned out, when journalists covered the case, they used photos of Shotaro where his hair was brightly dyed. People rushed to judge him solely based on his appearance, writing things like, "He's obviously just a delinquent, probably one thug killing another, and even, well, one less lowlife." These heartless remarks shattered the grieving family, compounding their anguish. In reality, Shotaro only dyed his hair during summer vacations, not to stand out, but as a simple form of self-expression. He was never involved with bad company and had no reputation as a troublemaker. However, the rumors surrounding him grew so out of control that the school principal felt compelled to make a public statement defending his name. Shotaro was an exemplary student who never caused problems, either at school or at home. The principal's public statement emphasized this, praising Shotaro's character and actions. Yet the stereotypes clung stubbornly to his image, and no critical leads in the case emerged. Despite this, Shotaro's family and friends refused to give up. They printed and distributed flyers, independently gathered any information they could, and even announced a reward for valuable tips. But all their efforts remained in vain. Years passed. The pain of loss never truly subsided, but as days turned into months, and months into years, the family carried on. 11 years after Shotaro's murder, in 2021, an unexpected lead came to light. Someone reported that a man named Kenta had been boasting about killing someone, and the details he shared bore an eerie resemblance to Shotaro's case. Grasping at even the faintest hope, the police reopened the investigation. Kenta, 28 years old, appeared to lead an ordinary life, working for a company. However, further digging revealed that shortly after the murder, he had left the country. He had lived in China for some time and later traveled to Germany, ostensibly to attend a soccer match. This itinerant lifestyle seemed deliberately designed to keep him off the police's radar. The investigation still required concrete proof. Police compared the DNA found on Shotaro's shirt to Kenta's DNA, and the results were a 100% match. It was him. After 11 long years, the true murderer had been identified. On August 4, 2021, Kenta was officially arrested and charged with Shotaro's murder. It seemed as though the family's decade-long torment had finally come to an end. However, an unpleasant detail soon emerged. At the time of the crime, Kenta had been a minor, only 17 years old. This meant he would be tried as a juvenile, subject to the legal protections and limitations that entailed. His identity was shielded by law, and no personal details about him were disclosed. Despite this, Shotaro's father admitted he had braced himself for such a possibility. He had suspected that the person who killed his son might have been a teenager. The family focused on coming to terms with at least the fact that the perpetrator had been apprehended. But one question still loomed, unanswered. Why? Why had he killed Shotaro? It was the one truth they desperately yearned to uncover. So what was Kenta's motive? This question was particularly painful because the reason turned out to be outrageously trivial. Kenta killed Shotaro simply because he looked too happy with his girlfriend. That was it. It was revealed that during high school, Kenta had experienced a breakup with a girl who fell in love with a delinquent. Afterward, he became the target of bullying by school gangs and eventually dropped out. He blamed these delinquents for all his misfortunes. At the time of the murder, he was battling depression, and upon seeing Shotaro and his girlfriend radiating happiness, he suddenly snapped and committed the killing in a fit of rage. Later, he claimed to have felt immense guilt, attempting to garner sympathy. However, looking at Kenta's behavior after the murder, it becomes clear that his words were nothing but lies. In 2017, he authored a novel and published it online. The plot bore an unsettling resemblance to Shotaro's murder. The protagonist, a high school dropout, encounters a group of cheerful, delinquent teenagers near his home and, in a rage, kills them. In the story, only one girl survives. The details, including the bullying and school troubles, were too similar to reality, strongly suggesting that Kenta had drawn inspiration from his own cruel history. Moreover, Kenta led an active life on social media, held a stable job, and presented himself as a seemingly well-adjusted person. This completely contradicted his claims of feeling guilt. Shotaro's family had believed the murderer lived in constant fear of being caught, but they learned that Kenta felt no remorse whatsoever. This realization caused them unbearable pain and anger. On June 7, 2024, the trial began. All members of Shotaro's family were present in the courtroom. When the prosecutor asked Kenta if he admitted to stabbing his victim multiple times, he replied, "Yes, I stabbed him, but I didn't intend to kill him. I didn't even think he could feel pain or get hurt." This justification sounded absurd. At the time of the murder, Kenta was 17 years old. Yes, it was still his teenage years. But to claim at that age not to know that stabbing someone could lead to death is utterly ridiculous. The court, unsurprisingly, did not take Kenta's excuses seriously. A psychiatrist who examined him testified that Kenta was likely faking symptoms of schizophrenia in an attempt to evade punishment. Ultimately, Kenta was sentenced to 18 years in prison. This sentence was considered an unusually severe application of the juvenile law. According to the legislation in effect at the time of the crime, the maximum sentence expected for a minor was no more than 15 years. Shotaro's family, while not considering the sentence entirely fair for such a grave crime, expressed some satisfaction that this case set a precedent in how juvenile offenders could be treated in court. However, Kenta immediately filed an appeal after the sentencing, and the appellate process is still ongoing. To this day, there has been no sign of remorse or acknowledgement of guilt on his part. Shotaro's family understands that they will never return to the life they once had, the one where their beloved youngest son was with them. For the victims of crimes and their loved ones, there is no true closure. Despite their profound grief, the family dedicates themselves to helping other families affected by similar tragedies. They actively promote initiatives and support networks for victims, tirelessly working to transform their pain into a force for good. We mourn the tragic loss of Shotaro and express our hope that his family may one day find peace, despite the immeasurable void left by his absence.